For 300,000 years, no human being on Earth had ever looked through a clear pane of glass. Not one. Not kings. Not emperors. Not the richest man alive. Instead, every single night, families across the planet did something that sounds insane today. They cut a hole in their own wall, and then spent every evening deciding whether to freeze or to suffocate. That is not an exaggeration. That was the actual choice, and it lasted for almost the entire span of human history. Today we're going back to the era before glass ever touched a window, and by the end of this, you will never look at the window beside you the same way again. Picture a one-room house, sometime around the year 1000. Floor of hard-packed dirt, roof of straw, and somewhere near the top of the wall, a single hole, about the size of your shoulders. That hole didn't have glass. It didn't even have a proper name yet, at least not the one we use now. The word window comes from an Old Norse word, vindauga, which literally means wind eye, not light hole, not view, wind eye, because the people who built it were being brutally honest about what it actually did. It let in weather. There was no screen, no glass, nothing to filter what came through, just a wooden shutter on a leather hinge and a decision you had to make every single day of your life. Here's the deal. Nobody had a way around. You open the shutter, light pours in, and so does everything else. Wind, rain, cold air, insects, even a thief if it's nighttime. You close it, and you're safe and warm, but you're sitting in near total darkness in the middle of the day. There was no in-between. Historians estimate that in a typical one-room home like this, the shutter stayed closed more often than open for most of the year, which means people were living in a permanent brownish gloom, indoors, during daylight hours, for most of their lives. And it gets worse, because there was almost never a chimney. The fire burned in the middle of the room, and the smoke had nowhere to go except up, across the ceiling, and slowly out through that same tiny hole. So the one opening bringing you light was also one of the only things keeping you from choking on your own fire. Open it too little, you choke. Open it too much, you freeze. That was daily life. Not for one unlucky family, for almost everyone on the planet, for thousands of years. So people did what desperate, clever humans always do. They tried everything. The cheapest fix, a piece of linen soaked in animal fat until it turned cloudy and stiff, stretched over the hole. It glowed faintly with light and blocked most of the rain. It was ugly, it smelled, and for a huge number of families across medieval Europe, it was considered an upgrade. One step up, stretched, scraped animal skin, thin enough to turn pale and see-through, the same material scribes wrote on as parchment. Then it gets stranger. In many regions, the best material available was cattle horn, boiled for hours until it softened, then split open and pressed flat into thin amber sheets. It's actually where we get the old word, lanthorn, a lantern with sides made of horn. For centuries, a flattened cow horn in your wall was considered a genuinely respectable thing to own. And in the coldest parts of the world, where there wasn't much else, people turned to the dried, stretched inner lining of an animal's stomach or intestine, sewn into panels. It kept out the cold. It let in a pale, ghostly light. It was also, by any modern standard, a window made of guts. None of these people thought they were being primitive, by the way. They were engineering a solution to a genuinely brutal problem, with whatever materials their environment gave them, completely independently, on opposite sides of the world, all reaching for the exact same impossible thing, light, without the world coming in with it. There was one material that hinted at what was actually possible, and strangely, it came out of the ground. Certain stones, alabaster, selenite, thin sheets of a mineral called mica, could be sliced so thin that light passed straight through them, turning warm and golden, almost like honey. The Romans used it in their grandest buildings. So did some of the earliest churches. There are still churches standing in Italy and Spain today, where the windows aren't glass at all, just polished stone. And on a bright day, the whole interior turns gold. It was beautiful. It was also heavy, fragile, wildly expensive, and completely useless if you actually wanted to see outside. So it stayed exactly where the wealthy and the powerful lived, nowhere near the one-room house we started in. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, builders in Japan, Korea, and China were solving the same problem with something closer to art. Wooden lattice frames covered in tough, oiled paper, letting in soft, even daylight that could slide open for air. It's the direct ancestor of the shoji screen you might recognize today. Elegant where the cow horn window was grim, but underneath, the exact same trade-off. Light, but never a clear view. Here's the detail that gets left out of most versions of this story. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. A tiny high window meant less light to work by, which meant more people working and sewing by an open flame in a smoke-filled room for hours, every single day. Historians studying pre-industrial households point to smoke inhalation and eye damage from firelight as constant, quiet health problems, especially for women who did most of the close needlework. And a house that stays sealed and smoky for months at a time is also a house where disease spreads fast. Then there's the other risk. A house with almost no windows is a house that's hard to escape from in a fire, and thatched roofs over an open indoor flame caught fire constantly. When it happened at night, in a one-room house with a single shuttered hole for an exit, the results were catastrophic. So the wind-eye wasn't just an inconvenience. For a huge number of people across history, it was quietly shortening their lives. And here's the part that should make you angry. On behalf of everyone we've just talked about, someone had already fixed this. Centuries earlier, Roman engineers had figured out how to pour molten glass into a flat pane and set it into a window frame, clear enough to see shapes and movement through, while keeping the wind and cold completely outside. They built it into their grandest bathhouses. It was real. It worked. And then their empire collapsed. The trade routes that supplied the raw materials broke apart, and that knowledge all but vanished from ordinary life across most of Europe for the better part of 1,000 years. Which means somewhere, underneath old Roman ruins that medieval families were literally recycling into barns and fences, the answer to their entire miserable, smoky, freezing problem was sitting in the dirt. They had no idea. So that's the world before window glass. A wind-eye cut into a wall, a fire you couldn't escape, and a choice between freezing and suffocating, repeated every single day for most of human history. But here's the twist. Nobody expects when glass finally did come back into people's homes centuries later, it didn't make things better right away. It created a brand new problem, one so ridiculous that governments actually started taxing people for the sunlight coming through their own walls, and families started bricking up their own windows on purpose to avoid the bill. That's a story for its own video. If you want to see how daylight itself became one of history's strangest taxes, hit subscribe and stay close. This channel digs up the objects hiding in your everyday life, one forgotten history at a time. That's a story for its own video, and trust me, it is a wild one. We are going to look at how governments actually figured out a way to put a price tag on the sun. If you want to see exactly how daylight itself became one of history's strangest taxes, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and stay close. While you're down there, smash the like button if you learned something new today. It really helps the channel out. We are on a mission to dig up the secret objects hiding right in front of you in your everyday life, bringing you one forgotten history at a time. Click the video on your screen right now for another crazy historical mystery, and I'll see you over there.